It's Friday. Welcome. It's Frequency Fridays. I'm Karenann McDonald, and let's get right into it. It's been one up and down roller coaster of a week. So, oh my gosh, where to start? So, I don't know. It's been a really busy week. And for those of you that have been following me or not, I have done many, many shows this week. And actually, one of them we're going to start with. I want to give a shout out. Last week, we were talking a little bit with Danny Henderson. Danny Henderson is amazing. How many of you guys know who Danny Henderson is? Because it's absolutely amazing what's been going on. Danny is set up something, and what she did is she's got this incredible group. It's on Facebook. She is a searcher. She is hot. She is actually getting things in. Her channel is called GSIC on YouTube. She's the creator of the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection, and she will be doing basically a gathering, but also a conference coming up in the UK in September. But where is she going to get all these incredible people? She's getting people like David Icke. She's getting people, whether you like them or not. She's getting Kathy O'Brien. She's getting some of the top people in the industry, even Billy Carson, who likes to go gallivanting all over, look at those things and bring us forbidden knowledge and things like that, or hidden knowledge and going to the pyramids. As I said, there's a lot of stuff in there. And, I got the chance actually to go ahead and start looking at some of the different information that I had in, our area. And our area here is what we call the Kootenays. And the Kootenays is known as the Sinaiac territory. Some people think it's British Columbia. And in British Columbia here, there's a lot of different information, and that information had to pertain. We were talking about Stargates. We were talking about children. We're talking about protection. We're talking about, does anyone feel a little different, with all the different frequencies and the energies and the Schumann wave, and, how's it affecting you? And I started talking about some of the things my friends, not only my friends, but my clients were reporting to me. And I think, oh my gosh, this is absolutely incredible, right? So I'm going to share a little bit here, and hopefully this will translate. And welcome to you guys. I see Joseph's in there and Healing Touch is in there, and it's great. We're going to be here for a short time, not a long time. And hopefully we can make it next Friday as well. I'm just in the myths or the mystics or the mysteries of actually relocating myself. And, it involves a whole bunch of stuff, not just relocating all your belongings. It's resorting. It is downsizing. It's reevaluating life. So as we move, inside out, outside in, the micro and the macro, that all gets into play. But it's one of those things I'm going, are we going to have existing internet, or do I have to go up and hook up a Starlink? So next week is kind of a little bit combobulated. And, I've got everything as well contained because I have a 16-foot little camper scamper. So it goes behind my truck. So one of those things that's really important is to have things so that you're always ready. So, whether it was a brownie or a leprechaun or whatever I was when I got my brownie badges, right? Like a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout, always be ready. Always be ready. That's what I've actually found, right? And so it's really important to do that. So one of the things briefly here, if you haven't seen my show with Danny Henderson, I'm going to say, just do this because this is really interesting. I've been in their chat rooms, and it's kind of cute because I remember going in about 2-3 months ago, and I was making some comments and just adding my 2 cents worth, right? And actually, Terry, who's now gone on my Facebook, and it's so funny because since I went on there, right now, Facebook has said you can only talk to 4 people a day. 3 to 4 people a day is all I can add and talk to people. And so I just discovered there's hundreds of people waiting in the wings in the list for me to add on. And, I can't even go to them to say, can you go to here? Can you email me? Whatever. They're literally sitting in limbo. And I went, wow, that's real nice. It's one thing to get banned on Facebook. It's another thing to have them, not being able to contact them, right? So one of the things that, when I was talking with Danny, that was really important because, you may know each other in the field, or we've been in groups. And if you're in Zooms, right, there's 20, 30 people and you're just it feels like the Brady Bunch. You're just a little square, the Hollywood games, right? You're just matching up here. But it's the first time we got to talk. And it was really what you're doing is you're finding common ground. And it was really interesting because we literally only talk a lot of times, sometimes 10 minutes before. And Daddy's got her notebook out, and she's diligent like me. I keep notebooks and stuff and journals back here all the time. And it was hilarious because, she's making notes and she says, I'm overwhelmed and I don't even know where to start. She says, I'm throwing anything at you and you've got something on it. So anyway, but she is very, very lovely. And she's just got a warm, enticing, personification, everything else. And it's funny because, like, as you see, right, she's sitting there and she's got her notes out and there she is. She's making, I'm not joking. Those are all the notes she made in less than 10 minutes with us talking, right? Like, where do we go? And it was interesting because we've both been to Calgary, so we can talk about Calgary and Banff and the beauty that we find in there. And so those are actually kind of fun. So if you haven't seen that, I'm going to link that here because, I mean, that's just amazing, right? You can actually see some of that and see what we did there for our Q552 base. So I talked a little bit about the Stargates, and one of the things in there that's really, really important is for times to know the trajectory of where we are and we're talking. And sometimes you can, be able to do screen privileges and sometimes you can't. So you never know where that's going, right? So bonjour, comment ça va? We have Chantal's here and also Mystifying Mark. Mark's in the room. So, these are kind of things that, we're kind of gathering here. Have you noticed that? I've been in some incredible rooms. And so that was one. And then, of course, it was funny because I thought actually Carrie Cassidy had heard or saw that I was on there and she wanted to talk about sort of the same thing. So she pre-booked me, not knowing that I was on Danny's show. And I actually just never assume, right? Never ever assume, because you think we're all kind of like in the same field, but we're not. And things don't always cross over. So then next thing I know, Carrie Cassidy was asking, for me to be on the show. So we did that. And so her YouTube is back up. And at least that's kind of nice. So her YouTube she got, and she's been able to get that because that's been like really suppressed down. And so in there, we started talking and seeing what happened. And then all of a sudden, what she found out literally a couple hours before we went on the air was that basically David Wilcock had passed away. And of course, she's known him for a long time, right? And so in there, basically, whether you interview someone or you have a connection, and she based a lot of her stuff on what was going on. And what happened is all of a sudden, she found out that he passed away. And so this hit some people like a ton of bricks. And it was really unfortunate. And she figured it was synchronistic because she goes, I don't know if I can talk right now, and like anyone, some people take shock and grief in many different ways. And when you have an actual connection and you've done shows with people, whatever your feelings are, she took it really hard. And she's got a lot of, like anyone else, we have a different take. We all have a different viewpoint. We have different filters when we talk to people, right? And so I was like, well, we don't have to talk about health. We can talk about other stuff. And I said, let's just talk. And sometimes, people need to, hear the grief, right? And so we started talking. I said, well, this is how my week was. And this is, I'll just update you since we've talked a couple months, right? And it really helped. You could see, relax. And then again, probably after about 20 minutes, we swing around and we go back into what happened. So when you know someone, whether you think it happened, didn't happen, you think it's a false flag, you think it's a psyop, you think whatever. But when there's a GSW, in other words, a gun, shot into basically a wound, right? And when people do that to themselves, there are such repercussions, whether we think it happened or not. And I mean, I was looking on the Boulder, Colorado sheriffs. I was looking on the corners like anyone else. And everyone's been like, I think, tossing around. Everyone's got an idea. He worked at Gaia, Jay Waldner's out. Everyone's got a different viewpoint. The point is that you've got people that, have had actually tragedies in their life. People have had a hard time in the last few years. Not everyone knows the background or the, things of people and how we react to things. Nonetheless, even if you think it happened or didn't happen, or people have been secreted away, is it another one of those things? Or the other thing that came up is, as in my community, is a lot of naturopaths have gone missing or shut down, or even in the area, as people think the governments of Canada or the governments of British Columbia are now locking down on people. And when they're starting to lock down on people, which is really hard, is you start seeing that any of the naturopaths are basically going underground. So most of my colleagues are underground, right? They don't want to put shingles up anymore. So we've already had to put little fires up as to who can come in and out of our clinics, because a lot of us have gone into just basically, almost like a members club, right? It's almost like, going to a gym. They're not open to the public anymore. So it becomes a bit of an issue. And so a lot of us, and I think, Chantel, you were there today too. I had the pleasure of being again in another Zoom with Ryan Williams. And again, the forefronts of doing voice activated biofeedback, using your voice instead of drawing blood, using the biofield and the energy to bounce signals off of, and see not only what's in the body, but to see what's in the biofield, right? What's in each little, we're like little trees here. We're the tree, and then you're looking at the rings, like what have we accumulated in this lifetime or another lifetime. So I'm really excited about some of the new changes that we're seeing, that we're able to help people. But not only that, is give these different devices and apps and software and share them out for a while and see what people can do. Because I mean, you can do amazing things. If you haven't had a session with me, I encourage you to do it. And if you don't want a session, I'm happy to meet people if they want to do a little freebie thing here for 10, 15 minutes and you want to just experience it. I've had people tingling all over the place. I said, I haven't really moved out of this chair since Friday, since, I did this show with Danny, because I mean, how do you help people, right? It's communication. It's not just about sharing things and doing frequencies and doing sounds and doing piloerection and teaching people meditation. And let's talk about pH. So until you get your pH corrected, nothing's going to correct, right? Until you actually get your elimination, like information in, information has to be sorted out. That's your digestive system. And then when you digest it out, where are you going to go? So again, that becomes literally your guts and your digestive system. And if it's not working and there's other people's information, which is to me almost like parasitical, that's like other people's information. And so you have to be able to sort that. That's going to be like a computer. You got to be defragged. We got to be detoxed, right? And everyone does it at a different pace. So one of the things in here, like I said, there's going to be so much interesting things coming out. And if you have questions about anything, certainly put them in the chat room. I'm happy to look at them and see what we can do. One of the things in here, and I'll show you the link again on here. Hopefully that will translate in a second. And so it was on the Project Camelot site, not her Carrie Cassidy, right? And this site just got reactivated in here. So there's one of the things here. If you haven't seen this, that's where her and I start talking, and like I said, literally, she was absolutely thrown by this information like anyone would. So anyone that you care about or anything like that, that became part of the information, like I said, with people and finding out what happened here. So I'm going to put that link in here because, like I said, we just listened to her. I didn't have any like direct information. So this is something, again, like I said, it's like anyone, we have to have compassion for people, right? This is something that, someone took some just absolutely devastating news, so I think we can all appreciate that when any one of us have gone through that. So like I said, I got hit with it. Literally, she got hit with it 5 minutes before I did, and we went on the air. And so it was funny because I really thought it was really nice of people. They said, you know what? That was one of the best conversations I've ever heard you, because they could see me actually being compassionate to someone that in an immediate state of, brevity and stuff like that. And again, these things will work itself out. Like anything else, everyone's got an idea on it. And as I said, I don't, but I also saw where people became very malicious to someone, right? They've had some malicious things about that video. And there are people like Stephen D. Kelly that came out and said, oh, Karen thinks she's a psychic. I'm not the remote viewer, and I'm not the psychic she did. That was after she talked to me, right? remember, she had just gotten the information. So hours later, she was talking to people. And whether people, and even I saw stuff on, Mystic Thing and Truth Seeker and Jay Wildners and everyone, Gaia TV, everyone's got a thing at it, even Mel Carmine phoning the police and like harassing them. Come on, they've put out statements here. I see a lot of people doing stuff, and it's almost like they're trying to get airtime. Like, this is ridiculous. But anyway, like I said, I never actually met him. I've read his books. I remember back in like 2011 and 10 in the Synchronicity Tea, and like anyone else, like Cosmic, Divine Cosmos, we hear a lot of this stuff. It either resonates or you throw it in a filing cabinet, right? There's so much stuff. You don't know people's financials, backgrounds, and like, with all the lawsuits and millions of dollars that people have lost, or their health has been compromised, or, with demise. No one can have like major diabetes and stuff like that, like he was talking about, unless you're usually on something. And we know what any kind of injection or pill will do to people these days. So whether this happens or doesn't happen, it's creating trauma within communities. And that's part of the thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today. I also want to talk about something really exciting. And we're going to go into something called Parthenogenetics or Parthenogenesis. And so I think that's a really exciting thing. So I'm going to put those links in there, because if you haven't seen them, at least you can look at it later. So there was me and Carrie Cassidy. And like I said, I was in there to simply speak on, if you think about essential health, we were going to talk about tuning and, getting your energy fields up and stuff like that, and just catching up. I like to hear, anyone that's had the amount of, like, when someone's had thousands of interviews, right? And I've spoken to thousands and tens of thousands of people over the years. I don't air a lot of them, but I think it's really interesting to see people's different points of view, just like you go to another place and you look at, what is the culture there? What are the people like? And anyone that's talked to a lot of people like that, I think it's absolutely fascinating. So yeah, if you get a chance to see, I'm going to put the Project Camelot that I put on there. And like I said, and me, that was kind of fun. But, we talked about a lot of things. I talked about right now, I had someone show up my door the other day, literally 9:50, and I'm still in my pajamas, right? Because I didn't have any appointments till 10. So I'm sitting there, hadn't done anything yet, still sitting there in my little flannel pajamas. And literally my girlfriend showed up and she said, my house is shaking. I'm seeing my dead cat. I'm also seeing dead people and interdimensionally. The colors are changing. And oh, by the way, I'm hearing this kind of music like a radio. I said, well, that should be totally normal for people. Remember, we're going through kind of 3D to 4D to 5D. So things are blending in. That's why people are seeing ships. That's why their houses are moving. A lot of people are seeing things. We just had like friends of mine, they're out on the back porch and they're seeing 2 foot, 8 foot blue beans. I said, I don't know if they're Arcturians. I don't know if they're Syrians. I don't know what they are. I don't know if it's Project Bluebeam. I don't even know. But something's walking around in the backyard that's 8 feet, looking like, 2 big things. So anyway, like I said, you never know what's going to happen. So Lena Scott, how are you? And what's so now? Karen, do you practice OBE? Just curious. You know so much already while exploring this realm. Your mind's been blown. It happens a lot. That's what Danny said. That's what Carrie said. Anyway, we've all got a different kick at it. It's just I've got a different viewpoint and I've had different experiences, right? When I'm having, I can firewalk, put it that way. So actually, right before we were here, I met a girl and I want to talk about the Parthenogenetics, and I want to talk a little bit about a really amazing author and woman I met. That's whose picture I put up. It's Maureen Walton O'Brien. So we're going to talk about, and it's called The Wisdom of the Womb. It's for men and women, by the way. I just gave, I've got the workbook, so it's just a little bit smaller. So I gave one of the guys just a workbook. I said, I want you to read this a little bit. And I saw him today because I gave him the book, because I got 3 of these books, right? I said, what are you thinking? And he says, this is, and they know about telegony and they know about this, but the idea, and I'm going to talk about parthenogenetics, he says that women can procreate. That's what you call the Immaculate Conception. That's the mystery of the women going back Tartarian. And he says, if this is true, he says, it's really scary and mind blowing. And I said, of course it's true. If you can walk on fire, we can self-create, right? And basically, you can go into the egg and actually inseminate it through energy and light. That's really what they call the Immaculate, or the Virgin, or the Virgin Marian lines, Magdalene lines and stuff. So anyway, this is a great book. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. I'm going to be bringing her on to interview her after I get settled. So hopefully sometime in May, you're going to see me talk. But I've been in many different rooms, red tents, and she runs a lot of these out of, it's a place called Belleville, not Bellevue, but Belleville is in the, like as you think Ontario area. So we want to talk a little bit about that. So I've learned how to firewalk, and I've had different experiences where I feel like I've been reshoved back into the physical avatar here. I have time traveled many times. Actually, a friend of mine will be coming over shortly, and I took one of the seniors out, and I was telling Carrie about this because we're talking about, timelines and shifting and converger, multiple timelines, things like that, convergent parallel timelines and stuff like that. And so probably about 2 months ago, I went to another town. We had very specific appointments. I was supposed to be there by 1. We left probably about 20 after 12, which gave me, 45 minutes to get to my appointment, drop some people off, which I did. And then I got to my appointment, and they said, "Why did you come here? Everyone just went for lunch." I went, "What do you mean for lunch? My appointment's at 12. My truck's supposed to be on the hook, and you're supposed to change my tires." And he goes, "Well, no one's going to be here for, 45 minutes. And I said, "Well, what time is it?" I said, I just left. It was 12:15 or so. And they said, "It's not even 12:30. So by the time I dropped some off, came back, and I'm like, "How do you explain that?" We went through a time hole. We time walked. I came back in. I mean, there are many explanations to this. It's not the first time I've had this happen. But what was more fun is when I went to go pick up my friend that's a senior, that I take out to the pools and stuff once in a while. And I sat there. I said, "How was your lunch? Anything different?" And just, same thing, right? It wasn't just me this time. It was like I dropped him off. He went to the restaurant, walked over there, put his order in. They cooked up his order. They brought it to the table. He's enjoying his meal. He looks around, and it's not even 12:30. So we knew that we had basically gone from one town to another town like that, like I Dream of Jeannie. That's how fast it happened. And I was there. So anyway, but when you're starting to do things like, I don't do the per se practice. I can go into that. It was really interesting. I was dealing with one of the girls, Christine, today, is that basically I was sitting here for about 40 minutes because she wanted to talk to me. And she was actually part of this Parthenogenetic groups that I'm talking about, that I met her through Maureen's group, right? In the Zooms. And you're not allowed in until you read the book, by the way. You got to have the knowledge. And it's like anything, you got to have the knowledge before you get to meet a lot of these people. So a lot of these, whether you want to call them elders or shaman or wise women, you can't go in until you meet them. It's the same thing in there. So I met one of the girls in there, and she said, "Well, I do all this, what do you want to call it? Quantum hypnosis and stuff." And of course, I've never been hypnotized in my life, including some of the top people. I've been married with Mary Rodwell and stuff years ago. It just doesn't happen. I've been as the third party while people are being put under. I've seen several of my clients literally put underneath hypnosis in front of me, right? But I'm usually the scribe, because a lot of people are not comfortable, obviously, giving over as they think their will, or going unconscious, or, whatever. So I've actually witnessed it happen, but it's never happened to me. And the first thing she said after I did that, I said, "Well, I felt really relaxed." And she goes, "Well, can you see colors? Can you see all this stuff?" I said, "I can firewalk." I said, "I could paint a picture in my mind, no problem. I did matrix energetics with Richard Bartlett." And I said, "You're darn right, I can do that." But I didn't feel anything, other than I'm feeling relaxed. And it was great. It was nice. Like, it was kind of like having a soothing voice, or listening to a meditation or a guided meditation, right? But did I have, as people think, an out of body or whatever experience? No. And then she said, "There's something about you," because she said she was a seer. And she says, "You either have so many guardians or angels or whatever it is." She says, "Like, you're guarded." I said, "That's right. No one's allowed to come in and look." Okay. And that was one of the first things I looked. And I said, she goes, "It's like you got firewalls." I said, "Are you surprised?" I said, and that was one of the first things, right? Sharing energy. That was one of the first things when you get into energy. It's not that you're a facilitator, you're holding space or any of that stuff. right? I don't let anyone in. First thing when they want to do is say, I'm doing a reading on someone. That's tapping into your energy, which is your radiance. Your rads is your reading, right? And I said, you don't give it to anyone. I said, I'm glad you see that there's a firewall and you can't get in. So when people are trying to tap in a remote view, no. And one of the things too, and that's the other reason I myself don't do psychedelics. And it's not that I'm a control freak, but I've also been in circumstances where people have, tried to lace things. I've seen people lace other people, right? And so I'm not comfortable doing that. And it was funny that what she said at the end of the session, like not even like half an hour ago, I literally finished it like 10 to 5 before I got on here. And she said, it's like you're there. You don't need a reconnection. I said, isn't that cute? Because that's the same thing with psychedelics. It's not just to control. I'm already there. I don't need a substance to have that. And a lot of things when you think shamanically or like soul retrieval, right? There are many different things. And you will hear a lot of people talk about in time traveling or time walkers or whatever you want to call it, out of body or astral traveling or whatever you want to call, is that there are things and entities and skynets and literally grids that can take people over. And the people that are actually that work for the forces will tell you they don't do that anymore. They don't want to because there's a chance you don't come back. And that was one of the first things I learned as well. People, first thing, energy is always there, it never whatever, and it's always going on. And I was shown very clearly by forces that yes, it can be. It can be actually taken down to the molecular level and even captured. There's a lot of stuff that was going in even to do with things in the Vatican and catacombs and stuff like that. So I don't really like to do that. I like to meditate, and I always know that I'm not a body, so I don't have to go out of body, right? But I think imagination is half of it, and that's part of when we're doing meditation or piloerection, or whether you call it Tai Chi or gathering energy or gathering prana. There's different things, and I think one of the most interesting things is when I was listening to her, and how many of you guys have been in groups, right? And you've listened to people meditate, or they're going to teach you their way or someone else's way. It's a template. And a lot of those templates, it's the language. I always think they speak with forked tongue. It doesn't resonate. And the minute I start hearing something, well, enjoy your body, enjoy this, or we're going to go block, or we're going to rebuke something, all of a sudden, that's it. My head just like, that's it. I shut off. It's not my language. I don't feel comfortable in that language or where they're leading me in that. That's resonates for different people, different languages. It was funny because while she was doing that, one of the most interesting things to me is many, many years ago when I was in Matrix Energetics. And I remember in Vancouver going, what is this dude? Who is this Dr. Richard Bartlett? Why is everyone all excited about this 15 years ago, right? And I literally would go up and I saw people literally fall to the ground. They were dropping like dominoes, just like, gopher hunting, boom, right? I was like, they're rebooting. And this was not like faith healing or something, charismatic or church or some, Pentecostal kind of movement. This was like learning the matrix energetics and how it works with. I went, this guy's brilliant, and I got to experience it. But I remember sitting in the back of the room, right? And there's like Friday night, because they want to get people in Friday night. Friday's a freebie. And then if they can get you in for the weekend, right? It's either like 300, 500, stay to, Monday, get your level 2. And next thing you know, there's, $500, $600, $800 to come, right? It's like Reiki Master, 500, 1,000, 5,000. It's all stuff. And a lot of it's symbolism for the most part. And I was telling her I don't resonate with a lot of that stuff because I've studied symbolism and what people use and what actually was ancients. Ancients aren't the original. The ancient was the technology they mimicked and co-opted and actually discombobulated it stuff. I always laughed. I've been saying discombobulated for years, and all of a sudden, like, the Mr. T comes out with what happened in Venice. We used the, discombobulator, right? I always thought it was funny. But anyway, I was talking to her and I said, some of this stuff with the language doesn't resonate. And you have to see what works with them. And I said, you have to go back if you want to do a lot of ancestral and genetic stuff and unwinding these things in the epigenetics, not just in thought, but in language. So literally, sometimes you have to relearn what your grandmothers or your babas or your great whatever were speaking like, 300, 400, 500 years ago. I said, when you talked about treaties and the times of peace and when we had peace on the earth, I said none of it was in English. It wasn't in Parsi syntax. It wasn't in Kamala. It wasn't in Persian law. It was a different language. So those are some of the things that I think are really, really important. And I learned doing that a lot when I grew up, basically what you call the Cree Nihilwak territories, what you guys think is the province of Saskatchewan, and Saskatoon's kind of right in the center sort of it. And it's a hub city. It's a hub center. It's a midway point for bases too. A lot of things go in that place, right? Huge, huge genealogical harvesting centers. It is a hub. And so when I was in there and I was working with all the Cree people around there, I learned very quickly, as you talk about people being scooped up. Remember, this has been going on for so many generations everywhere else. But here it's kind of fresh, right? And not that it hasn't been going on here for thousands of years, because people went, you didn't just get the 60s scoop and the Jesuits coming over and whatever thing. You got to remember the peoples that were here for thousands and thousands of years. All of our tribes were all over the world for thousands of years and millions of years. So it was interesting, though, when I started doing stuff, if I worked in English, it just didn't resonate, right? And I finally said one day to one of the Cree elders, right? And again, when you're dealing with post-traumatic stress or sexual abuse, that kind of thing, or ritual or whatever, you need to go back to the languages. And I said, when you were a little boy being taken and being ripped out by the Catholic Church and the priests and the RCP and whoever else has got, guns at your parents' heads and whatever, I said, what did you say? And he told me, mom, please don't let them take away mom, whatever. And he's, grabbing at his mom's, clothing. And I said, I failed to think that probably 60, 70 years ago, you were speaking in English if you're out there. I said, tell me what you said in your language. So the minute he said it in his mother's tongue, I did it phonetically. And then what happened, we did certain things, different oils, different energy points, and similar to matrix energetics, similar to what we're doing with biofeedback. That's why you got two headphones. It's kind of like two pointing, right? And you're the third. So you're actually three pointing. It's a trinary or trivector when we're working with people. And we collapsed that wave. It was absolutely amazing. His whole thing, literally shook. It was like the Kundalini, or like spontaneous healing. And you will see that in matrix energetics a lot. So I want to acknowledge Amy's there. How are you? That wasn't that long ago. I just talked to you. And Brett's in here. So I want to see if you've got some interesting, comments that you want to add to here. Bring some points that you want to talk about, or an experience, or bring a subject, and let's talk about that. One of the things I want to go into is a little bit about the Parthenogenesis, right? And this is for the men too. Okay. Better know what the women are doing. Anyway, this is really interesting in here. So this book, as you see here, right? And it's basically the original wisdom. Okay. And it's the mysteries, I'll say, of the universe or the multiverse. And I don't want you to think of it as in terms of dark, like light or dark. It's about the arc. And that's why I explained to her. I said, it's like the Ark of the Covenant, or Dahome, right? It's the same sort of thing. La home, la whatever. It's the Ark. And it's about some of that cosmic soul energy, right? That runs through people and where the blocks are. And we're talking about basically how the womb, the uterus, those chakras, those creative energy centers there are basically how they connect into the heart and then up into here. So it's literally not just meditation, but this is absolutely amazing here. Oh, and Kirsten's here too. Not sure if you know my handle. I didn't. Now we know who it is. Thank you. Nice for seeing you, Kirsten. So anyway, I want you to take a look at it. Maureen's only done a couple videos, right? She's a beautiful, beautiful soul in her 70s, right? And she wants to impart this women in here. And I think this is so, so important, right? On that. And I always looked, I said, I don't use the word good, but dark. So I want you to go in here. So anyway, it's about reclaiming the energy that's been stolen and it's been harvested. That's why I taught about things called what? Yoni steams, vaginal steams, or for men. You can do it for a man, a woman, a child. I actually steamed animals, by the way, dogs and cats. But in here, and what's the womb and the detox pearls, or the yoni pearls, not the crystal eggs. I'm talking about putting herbs in, using that to feed the soul to come up. The herbs can come up, the essential oils can come up, the energy can come up. And what it did is the women started regulating their menses or their moon time or the blood. And what was very cool, how many of you guys have heard that men actually, when you start going into the prana and the energy and the chi, and you start hearing a lot of that, is that they were not to ejaculate, right? Unless you were doing it for procreation purposes. And that the men were to retain their semen or their seed to give them more and more and more energy. You would bring the energy up as high as you could and you could raise it. That was the connection. So, how many of you know that Parthenogenesis is actually where the women were not bleeding? And the whole idea that when you had actually supposedly this moon time is actually when they were playing with the women's sacred energy, and your bleeding was actually like semen, you were losing your energy. Okay. A lot of people were taught, like in nursing, it's a cleansing period, it's a cycle, it's a fertility period. But what if you go back to some of this original temple or, different informations where they talked about the priestesses and the temple teachings? It's actually quite the opposite. So I think this is an interesting thing to explore. And about 2 months ago, if you go to my Rumble, I did some interesting talks with Fiona Gardner. I love Fiona. Fiona does biofeedback, and she's been doing genius biofeedback and in our genre as well since 2016, since I was on a video with Jimmy Church got a hold of me. So Fade to Black is like, kind of like Coast to Coast, very similar. And so I was on Jimmy's show and she saw me and she ended up getting into the biofeedback industry and we lost touch for a while. And so now Fiona is in the UK, but she's been doing live blood analysis, not just on blood. She's doing it on water, not just on water, like Dr. Emoto. She's doing it on urine therapy. And so part of it is we were looking at that and I'm like, are you sure these are crystals that you're seeing and you're reforming the sacred geometry through what we're doing? Or is it the nanotech? And she was very clear to me, this is not the nanotech being passed through. This is not reassembling of crystallization through the graphene. It's something totally different. And so those are some great interviews. But this is one of the things in here I think that's amazing. And who gave the foreword here is someone called Maria Wheatley. I love Maria. I've been connected to her for like probably about 2 decades as well. She's very well known in the UK. She comes from a long line of doing divination. And she goes to all these sacred sites, the Waters, Avebury, Wiltshire, all the cairns. There are other cairns, but the mounds, the sacred mounds and stuff like that, but also the pyramids. So that's the same thing. Like when you look at Carrie Cassidy and a lot of these people, they're really drawn, or like I was talking just down the road, one of my neighbors is David Sarita, right? People have been there and they know about some of the pyramid energy and they're releasing a little bit. And again, everyone's got to take at it. I don't think everyone's got it all, but we're putting our information together. But this is when basically the women step back into these, old ceremonies that were passed down from wise women, and again, I know, even when you learn about, I'm going to do a whole thing about, yoni and steaming for men and women, right? That's what you go into a sweat lodge, right? You got men on one side, women on the other. It's like a church. It's like going to the tabernacle. Women on men on the other. It's like going into a synagogue. If you've ever done that, and they have that for a reason, right? But they have men's lodges and they have women's lodges. There are some that are mixed, but there are different elements. Even the trees and the stuff that we use in the women's lodges are not the same as men. I don't know if you guys know that. And I want to do a whole thing on I feel like, get your tartan out, right? And the klanmothers and everything else. That's like the Highlander and, Braveheart and all those sort of things. We get Mel Gibson, right? They had their tartans. Those were the bloodlines. They knew who they were. They knew where they came from. And, one of the things as well is that when you look at these, original things is we need to look at back. These are the people that actually took over running the planet because they do it. You've always heard about royalty, right? They conceive on a certain thing. That's why they talk about virginal births, right? And virginal is always something that is, like I said, it can also be the Parthenogenesis. And so one of the things too, Brett mentions, which I was in that Zoom actually, I've been on several Zooms, right? I don't throw babies out with bathwater. I like to do stuff, learn, absorb, throw it in my filing cabinet and come back. right? You've seen how these people like Dr. Group, Dr. Artist, they're coming back, they're learning stuff, right? Now all of a sudden, I wish they'd get rid of all their pharmaceuticals. It'd be nice, and stuff that's, adding to the nanotech. We don't need a lot of that semi-pharmaceuticals being fed back to people through multi-level marketing. But there is a sacred union, right? And 1 and 1 is 3, right? And there's a sacred love or dynamics or energy between men and women, and conceiving and the retention was one of the key things, but also for the women. And this is where they're teaching, and I'm not going to go a lot into it because it's something that's kept sacred within those lodges, but there are different things that they're teaching people through meditation, and different things and changes in lifestyle, changes in food, all sorts of things. And again, now with what I'll just say, what's happened the last 7 years, they weren't even aware of it. I was telling them, I said, we're in a different thing here in the last 7 years, right? We got little girls like 6, 7, and 8 that are bleeding, and I've got women in their 80s bleeding again. I've got other people that have been, secondary exposed to what, or took the what, or took the things in the nose and what. And now I've got women that come to me that they've been bleeding for years, 4, 5, 6 pads a day. Try living with that. So a lot of them think, gosh, we've been able to stop. But there's a whole thing. They were not aware of what this thing did to target the women, and to target the genetics, and to target the sacred womb because of the procreation. And so a lot of the stuff in there, one of the girls was mentioning, I was at a sweat lodge last Sunday, and it was powerful. And a lot of the teachings to me in the processes, I don't go into lodges anymore. I will never go into a sweat lodge, because right now you've got people, and the shedding is like, it is immense. And going into not only breathing, but with heat and people in there, I learned that 15, 20 years ago. That's the best place. And you don't know where people have been or what they've taken and injected. That's why it came into teaching the sacred sweat lodge was the sacred yoni, or the resume, or the pelvic steam. Sweat lodges were done for women, especially, and men, by the way. They were done in chairs, and the steam came up this way. They sat, if they were doing it outside, in a tiny little fire, and they put the herbs or the exhibition, or they did incense, or now we do it a little bit more modernly. But what happens is they had individual holes. They didn't sit there and go into one room and have everything dump. It was an internal process, and you go inside as opposed to being outside. So in other words, there's a difference between having an enema and sitting in a bathtub. Totally different, right? That's why we teach a lot of that, in there. And I'll go a little bit more into here. But Maria Wheatley was one of the ones, and she's with the mystery and the esoteric things. And, I've been teaching like a lot of people, like all of a sudden in Ireland, like the women that have some of those original, like, Celtic or Ire, the land of the Ire, and the Michael Tessarian, and all these like sacred, things in here, because a lot of this stuff is how people have lost their ways. And I can go to bands and reserves, and a lot of times they don't know what I'm talking about, because it's been too colonized, right? You're talking, there are very few people that are knowledge or wisdom keepers, and things were given to different tribes, right? The white tribes received certain information. The black tribes received something. The Asian tribes did. And there's only 3 red tribes, right? Most people don't realize that. The majority, if you looked at the medicine wheel, it's not 4. It's how many tribes divided between the bloodlines. So that's only 3 out of 13. That means the others, there's a lot of mixture in there, and no one's got it all. We needed to bring our information back like a piece of puzzle at the end of the days. And this is where basically she's woven her information. And so I really encourage you to take a look at what Maureen has been given, because it was quite interesting that this cute little Irish woman is sitting there, and she's not only an artist, but they commissioned her to bring back some of these teachings. And like anything, there's for men and for women, right? Learning the symbolisms and stuff like that, learning the shifts on the intention, and how to gestate and start bringing in those cosmic energies. And part of it is learning the sacred geometry, like the Merkaba, and starting to look at the torids and stuff like that, so that you can actually visibly bring it up. So I think you're actually going to have an exciting time learning some of this. And a lot of these came from the Cuero, like a lot of the Mayan and the Peruvian and the Jaguar, and all these different things as well. So I thought this might be something really exciting that you guys actually might like. And so a lot of the stuff, she was taking it, and we've been taking it from different tribes, and I've met with matriarchs and shaman and chieftains and headsmen from all over the world as well, too, over the last, especially 20, 30 years, trying to gather this information. That's what we're doing. We're gathering the pools of the information, right? And this was a very interesting thing. And I'd like to actually bring her on maybe in a couple of weeks once I got settled. And we can talk about the heart to womb meditation that she learned off the Cuero. So it was really nice. She called me up actually this week and she said, can I just spend some time with you? I'd actually like to teach you just one-on-one. She said there's only a handful of people she's been, releasing the information to. And basically what it is, it's not only for, as they think, enlightenment and getting there, but it's the ability to self-conceive, right? And this whole thing that, you could do different ways of creating children with man, with the sperm, or to have it also because the sperm is the entrance to the sacred womb, to the temple, to the Stargate. And of course, we're all hearing about fighting over Stargates, like whether in Iran or, Hope or Nelson or whatever. Everyone's got gates and illegal gates here. But I think that's one of the things here is that we can look at in the first system that they were able to inhale. And that's kind of like a raindrop technique when we were doing massage. It was first brought into Dr. Gary Young's awareness from the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, whatever, in those areas, and southern Saskatchewan in there. And they started, because they couldn't come over the borders, they started breathing in the energies and breathing in the oils and stuff like that. And it's very, very powerful. So this is one of the things too, and Amy's got a great point, that she's very happy, as I am too, that this wisdom isn't being lost. It's being brought through. And like I said, it's a mixing of the information and bringing in the power of the nature. So I really wanted to bring this to you and see this. So if you haven't seen it, the womb is not, and the cervix and the vagina is not a sexual organ, not at all. And when you start learning about the Kundalini, when I developed a lot of these things, even in the genus biofeedback, I want you to think in terms of, how you have acupuncture points. What do they call those things, even in Chinese or Japanese, right? They're beauty points, right? And those acupuncture points, it's the gates to the heaven. It's the beauty to this, right? When you actually do the translation into English, what the acupuncture points are, whether you think of the vagina towards the rectum, that whole perineal area, right? It's beautiful when you actually see what the gates are, right? So I think this is actually quite a mission in here, right? And to go in there, I always think of it as soul gate, but she's, I know, going to be doing these because it was the Wendy at Peacemakers, right? And you hear about, the ancient prophecies, right? Or the prophecies in here in the Tyendinaga area, which you guys calls Mohawks, which you guys, other people call into Quebec and Ontario. But this was basically the stones in the area that in there, she's in a very sacred area. And this is where it was known that the Virgin Mothers, the Virgin Marys, Meridian lines, even Bear Clan, you can look at Mary Magdalene. If you look at all the Fresnos, it was her and probably all the guys, right? But you keep going up on that Fresno. See, they never show everything, right? It's like when you study Shakespeare, right? You start going in Sir Francis Bacon and you start decoding stuff. Like people are asking me about ancestors and genetics. I said, go do your genes, do your pedigree, do your ancestrals, do your roots. If you can't do it, get a genealogist, do something. But when you start going, a lot of our stuff was actually on the castles, and we were decoding it because they would put just like their stamp, just like their logo. That's what it was. And you can actually see Mary Magdalene stuff was actually from their clan. She was the 13th klanmother at that time, and it gets passed down lineage, right? And a lot of those were to do with mixing of different groups, races, terrarians and non-terrarians, by the way. So in there, it was interesting because in where she is, it's called the Virgin Birth Mothers and the Mothers of the Nations. And I said, isn't that funny how I'm in the Siniac territory here, looking at the Slocan Lake for one of the last times, as I'm going to be, visiting or leaving this area here shortly, right? There's nothing like going on journey again. Where's the next adventure next week? But what happens, and these are all the prophecy rocks up here too. Many different areas. I've been in every different area, and they got prophecy rocks all over the point. Not just rock petroglyphs and paintings, but also hieroglyphics in some areas. And so one of these things here I thought was the inspiration about these virgin birth women, right? And that was the art. The virgin birth was considered the art of Parthenogenetics. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about that so you can look it up, because I know it's a big, long, but it's a medical word. You can Wikipedia it. It'll probably change tomorrow when we look at it again. But I want you to look at, and this is what actually Anastasia talks about in the Ringing Cedars. So Parthenogenetic here, there's a whole thing on there. There are actually some creatures and beings and animals on this life that do that. And again, they're going to give you the what do you want to say, colonized version of here. And so this is actually where at a certain point in the cells, actually they could direct it. So a lot of people think that the woman makes the egg and blah, 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 and she's creating it, and a sperm comes along and he determines basically the reproductive gender. Well, if you go back to the original teachings, that ain't what happened, guys. So again, this is part of those mystery schools. They're not going to put a lot out here, but this is where you're going to hear about it. And again, one of the things you're going to hear about, and we're going to got a couple more minutes before I have to leave. So again, let's look at Maureen Walton O'Brien. And she's got something called the darkness, right? And again, take a look at that. She's got some amazing stuff in here and a couple videos on here. So she's been teaching out there and doing art for a long time, but she's bringing this very vital information. And take a look at there. She's had just a couple of videos. You can go on there and take a look at it, because I think it's going to be really, really amazing here. So there's just done one of the few interviews out there. And I'd really like to see what, you guys would kind of think of this. So there's a few women, like I said, she's been out there, but I was like, wow, there's only 2-3 videos. So, we're going to talk about, getting the Holy Tribe back and the community and the peace community and all this sort of stuff. So I thought you guys would really enjoy this. So this is something, let's explore a little bit here on that. And then the next thing, if you haven't looked at, which of course is my favorite thing in the world, if you had to go somewhere and you had an island and you only had one set of books, is the Ringing Cedars of Russia. So Ringing Cedar, Passover Cedar. Okay. What does tribal mean? And Russia meant actually the people of the knowledge, the wisdom first. So Anastasia didn't do that right. Anyway, so one of the things in here you can take a look at is the Ringing Cedars, or what's known as the Anastasia series. I want you to take a look at this as well, because if you've got those books, you're going to know what I'm talking about. I've actually texted with Vladimir Meager. That was actually how these 10 volumes came to be. And she would have been basically like a tribal American clan mother. And millions of copies were done. And they started up all these kinships, homesteads, or what you call sacred domains. Or again, Russia means Vedism, means to know. And so in here, Anastasia is a real woman. I've known people that have met her. I've known people in the motherland over there. And it was basically in Bear Clan, Siberian, right? Coming back in here. And they actually were teaching the women, and the women were getting back their free 2.5 acres or a hectare, right? Because they're setting up their sacred communities that could self-sustain their in perpetuity for their lineage, their descendant, and their children. And they had to do that by law, because that falls into, again, the Noah's Ark, also the Cleopatra, Isis, or Chematic treaties. So, and there, so the women were actually being given back land with their titles, not to someone else, paying taxes, not paying any of that stuff, because it was part of it. And so there are about, I think, 300 places, as you call it, eco villages being set up. If you haven't looked at this, there are videos on this. This talks about eco communities. It talks about biodynamic permaculture, and it talks about the strange things that you talked about, like having astral traveling and all sorts of stuff, how to plant with the seeds in your mouth, all done by frequency. This is one of the biggest thing as you think about doing piloerection, biofield healing, This is one of the most pivotal books that there is out there about setting up field healing. Okay, and creating those areas and how people came together in peace. And there's free PDFs that you can download, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, even audiobooks. I have the original series, and like I said, you can certainly go in here and take a look at that. So I want you to enjoy this. I want you to take some of these things and just open your mind, put it in the, filing cabinet and see what comes to you. But there's certainly a whole bunch of stuff that you can download, different things here. They're on the archives. The original books in here were there. So anyway, thank you for joining me. I'm Karenann Looks Like McDonald, and have a great and wonderful day. Take care.